At just 17, the pain of being disowned by my adoptive parents left me feeling completely alone. It all started when I refused to give up my baby, only to later discover that my parents, after years of waiting, were finally expecting their own biological child. The cruel twist of fate hit me hard. When I was just 4, a horrific car accident claimed my parents' lives. I don't remember much about that day, only that one moment I was sitting in the back seat, and the next I woke up in a sterile hospital room. The sight of nurses and doctors bustling around me was terrifying, and everything felt so alien. I was numb with fear. I barely understood what was happening when a social worker sat beside my bed, softly telling me that my parents were gone and that I'd be placed with another family. The confusion and sadness overwhelmed me. The first few days were a blur as I was shuffled between different foster homes, none of which ever felt like a place where I truly belonged. It wasn't until I was 5 that I met Lorraine and James. They had wanted a child for as long as they could remember. From the very first moment I met them, I felt their warmth. They took me in, their love wrapping around me like a protective shield. It was the first time in a long while that I felt like I had a chance at a real family again. But the peace was short-lived. As I settled into their home, I began to see sides of them that didn't quite match the fairy tale I had imagined. James was a man of rigid rules and order. He wasn't the gentle, patient father I had hoped for. His military past had shaped him into a man who demanded discipline and precision in every aspect of life. He expected things to be perfect, and he was never shy about expressing his anger when they weren't. It wasn't until much later that I learned about his traumatic experiences as a war veteran, which seemed to explain some of his behavior, though it didn't make it any easier to endure. Still, it was Lorraine who caught my attention. While James maintained a strict control over every situation, she seemed lost, almost numb, to the world around her. When he wasn't home, she would drink to escape, sometimes finishing an entire bottle of wine by herself. She always had a sadness about her, a quiet sorrow that made her seem distant, disconnected. She never asked about my day, never inquired about my schoolwork. The only time I saw her active was in the kitchen, cooking and cleaning, trying to keep up with the expectations that James set so high. At first, their home seemed like a sanctuary, a place where I could finally find stability. But as I grew older, the cracks began to show. I began to realize that James wasn't just strict, he was abusive. His temper flared whenever I came home with less than perfect grades. He would shout, calling me stupid, telling me that if I didn't do better, he would send me back to the orphanage. That threat terrified me, and I worked hard, harder than I ever had before, to make sure I didn't fail him. But it didn't stop there. I began to notice the bruises on Lorraine's arms after their fights. She would retreat to their bedroom, her face swollen from the violence, and I couldn't understand why she never called the police. She would sit in silence for hours, crying softly, while James drank beer and watched TV, as if nothing had happened. I felt helpless, trapped between the walls of a home where the love I had hoped for was overshadowed by cruelty and pain. As time went on, things only got worse. James's anger shifted from my grades to the smallest details of my life, what I wore, who my friends were, even who was interested in me. He would tell me to go straight home after school, that hanging out with friends was a waste of time. He insisted that my friends would never amount to anything, so I needed to focus on my studies. Unbeknownst to James, Lorraine would secretly allow me to spend an hour with my friends after school. She saw it as a small act of defiance, a way to give me some semblance of normalcy in a world that felt increasingly suffocating. But the relief was brief. When James lost his job, his frustration boiled over. The stress of not having a job, combined with the financial instability that followed, made him even more volatile. I remember one night, Lorraine had prepared dinner, and when James sat down, he looked at the meal and snapped. His fury was immediate, his voice filled with rage as he yelled at Lorraine, calling her incompetent and threatening to throw her out if she couldn't cook properly. He threw his plate against the wall, and the sound of it crashing echoed through the house. Lorraine and I sat frozen, terrified, while James continued his tirade. My whole body trembled, my heart pounding in my chest. The days that followed were no better. James's drinking worsened. With no job to occupy his time, he spent his days sprawled out on the couch, empty beer cans scattered across the living room. Lorraine would clean up after him, silently bearing the burden of his behavior. I stopped seeing my friends altogether. If I was even a minute late coming home, James would demand to know where I had been. His control over me tightened, and I found myself walking on eggshells, always on edge, afraid that the next mistake would trigger his wrath. Then, when I was 15, something shifted. A classmate named Harry confessed his feelings for me, asking me out on a date. I was nervous about James finding out. But being a teenager, I felt an irresistible pull to experience what it was like to go on a date, to explore my own feelings, no matter the fear gnawing at me. So, despite all my apprehension, I agreed to go out with Harry. We met up at a local coffee shop after school, and as the hours passed, we chatted, laughed, and began to really get to know one another. That afternoon marked the beginning of something I could never have imagined. Going on that date with Harry turned out to be the best decision of my life. It was there, in the simplicity of our time together, that Harry and I fell for each other. He was everything James was not: gentle, kind, and caring, not just to me, but to everyone, even animals. He would surprise me with my favorite flowers whenever he could, even if it meant saving up his pocket money to do so. I never had a strong male role model in my life, so I didn't know what to expect from Harry. But from the start, he treated me just right, and that was something I had never known before. James, however, was always suspicious. He would ask me constantly if I was hanging out with any guys, and I would lie, desperately hoping that he wouldn't find out the truth. Luckily, I wasn't allowed to have a phone, so there were no messages to give me away. Harry and I were extra cautious about our dates. We didn't even tell our friends we were dating, hoping the news would never spread. Harry understood how scared I was of James, and he never pressured me to make our relationship public. When prom came around, Harry and I both agreed to go together with our friend group, trying to keep things low-key and avoid any suspicion. But, of course, that wasn't enough. When James found out that I wanted to attend prom, he absolutely refused to let me go. He said it was just a waste of time. He even went as far as refusing to buy me a dress. Honestly, I didn't care about the dress, I just wanted to enjoy the night with my friends. I pleaded with him, reminding him that I had always done well in school, just like he wanted. But he wouldn't hear it. He told me those friendships would mean nothing, that prom wasn't a big deal at all. The argument between him and Lorraine escalated when she questioned why I couldn't go when everyone else would be out having fun. I could still hear his words echo in my mind, how teenagers had no sense of right and wrong, how I didn't need to go, that I should stay home where I'd be safe. No matter how much I begged, no matter how much I tried to explain how important it was to me, James remained unyielding, dismissing my feelings as trivial. He threatened me, saying that if I snuck out to attend prom, he'd lock me out of the house for the night. So, on prom night, I was the only one who stayed home. I spent the entire night crying in my room, the weight of my loneliness crushing me. I was so tired of living under James's roof, tired of his control, tired of being treated like a child when I was growing up in so many ways. After high school ended, it became even harder for me to meet up with Harry. James wouldn't let me go out, and I didn't have a phone to keep in touch with him. I asked James if I could have one, but he refused, telling me I didn't need one. I argued, pointing out that I'd be going to college soon, and everyone else had a phone. He simply told me that if I wanted one, I should pay for it myself. That's when I decided to get a part-time job. It wasn't much, but it gave me enough to be a little independent. It also gave me the opportunity to see Harry without James finding out. I would tell him I was working, all while meeting up with Harry whenever I could. Then, the news came. I had gotten into an Ivy League university with a full scholarship. This was huge. It was the kind of achievement no one in my town had ever reached. James made sure everyone knew about it. He didn't congratulate me privately, but he boasted to anyone who would listen about how proud he was of me. It was as if he was taking credit for my success. But, at the end of the day, it didn't matter. I had done it on my own, and that felt amazing. The relief I felt was overwhelming. For once, James had nothing to complain about. I had fulfilled his dream for me. I'd earned the scholarship, I was working, and I was finally living my life on my terms. It was then that James finally agreed to buy me a phone, and he told me I could use the money I'd earned from my job to pay for college expenses. For the first time, he allowed me to hang out with my friends after work. It was as if I had finally earned the right to live like everyone else. Harry and I both knew that once we left for college, we would be apart. But we promised to see each other whenever we could. We were intimate a few times, always careful, always cautious. Then, 2 weeks later, I started feeling strange. My symptoms were odd, similar to those of my period, but I never actually got it. I knew something was off. And then, the cravings came, food at random hours. I panicked. I called Harry and told him I needed to take a pregnancy test. He agreed to help me. I did 3 tests, and all of them showed positive results. The shock hit me like a wave, and I collapsed onto the floor, crying. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Harry tried to comfort me, but I couldn't stop shaking. I knew what James would do if he found out. He would kill me. And this was all happening just before I was supposed to go to college. Harry reassured me that whatever happened, it was my decision. He would stand by me, no matter what. He promised to talk to his parents, and together, we would break the news to James so he wouldn't get violent. Harry's parents were supportive, kind, and understanding. His mother hugged me and told me that these things happen to everyone, so I shouldn't worry too much. They even agreed to come with us to my house to help us tell James. When Lorraine and James found out, they were stunned. Lorraine asked me twice if I was sure, and I nodded. I had taken multiple tests, so there was no doubt in my mind. James, on the other hand, exploded in rage. He yelled at me, telling me this was exactly why he never wanted to adopt kids, because there was no way to know if they'd turn out right. He hurled insults at me, calling me names that I won't repeat. He said I had ruined my life. Harry's parents tried to calm him down, but it was no use. James went off on them, blaming everything on his son, and I saw him on the brink of physically lashing out at Harry, who sat in the corner, silently. That's when I broke down. Through my tears, I told James that I wasn't planning on keeping the pregnancy. I promised him that everything could go back to normal, that I would go to college, just like we had planned. This is when Lorraine insisted that she needed to talk to James privately. They excused themselves while I sat there, crying, fidgeting nervously. Harry's parents watched me sympathetically, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my world was falling apart. Finally, Lorraine and James returned. Lorraine began speaking, her words hitting me like a tidal wave. She suggested that I didn't have to give up the child, that I could carry it to term and then give it up for adoption. Her belief was that this child was a gift from God, and she urged us not to consider any other options. I sat there, stunned into silence, as James joined in, supporting Lorraine's idea. He even suggested that this would be the best solution since Lorraine was already pregnant herself. The words they spoke left me utterly bewildered. I couldn't grasp what they were suggesting. And then, James explained what they had in mind. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. Just a week earlier, Lorraine had shared the news she was expecting. But they had kept it to themselves, still trying to process it all. Now, with my own pregnancy, they saw an opportunity to raise both children together as siblings. The weight of their proposal left me speechless. How could this be happening? Harry's parents were just as stunned, voicing their objections immediately. But James? He wasn't having it. He cut in sharply, stating that it wasn't their decision to make. Then, he turned to me, eyes locked on mine, waiting for my response. Nerves flooded me, but there was something else bubbling up beneath it all, a clear, undeniable sense of what I couldn't do. There was no way I could agree to this. The thought of giving up my child to be raised in the same environment I had grown up in, the same toxic atmosphere with them, it was unbearable. Lorraine had shown herself to be a caring mother in many ways, but I couldn't ignore the fact that she couldn't even shield herself from James's behavior. How could she protect my child? The fear of my unborn child being subjected to that same uncertainty, the same potential harm, it was a line I couldn't cross. As much as I had longed for the day I'd become a mother, the timing was all wrong. I couldn't bring a child into this world under these conditions. I couldn't risk their safety, their well-being, knowing the chaos that lay ahead. I'm happy to have a sibling, I told James firmly, but I can't go through with this pregnancy. I'm not strong enough, physically or mentally, to face it. I can't pretend that my child is just a sibling, not when I know the truth. The weight of that truth settled on my chest. Lorraine's tears came fast, her sobs raking through the room as she cried out how disappointed she was in me, how much she had sacrificed for me, only for me to refuse her this one thing. James, on the other hand, was furious. He stood up, pacing, frustration radiating from him. His words were sharp, accusing. I tried to explain, to make them understand, but it was like speaking to a wall. Harry's mother, calm and composed, sided with me. She's made up her mind, she said. Let's get her the appointment she needs. But Lorraine's sobs grew louder. James's voice grew darker, and I could feel his anger rising. "Are you happy now?" he sneered. "You're hurting her, and you don't even care." The words hit me like a slap. He continued, "Get your things and leave. I've had enough of you. You're nothing but ungrateful, selfish." The sting of his words was like a blade twisting deeper. I was thrown out. Just like that. Harry's parents, seeing the volatility in the room, gently told me to pack my things and leave as quickly as possible. I ran upstairs, my mind reeling, gathering only what I could: important documents, some albums, and a few clothes. I didn't have time to process what was happening. When I came back downstairs, James's warning hit me like ice. "Take what you can now," he spat. "Tomorrow, I'll throw it all away, burn it if I have to." I tried to reach out to Lorraine one last time, to make her see, but she wouldn't even look at me. As I walked out the door, James's parting words rang out, "Don't bother coming back." His final declaration felt like a knife in my chest. I couldn't understand why. What had I done to deserve this? To be disowned so cruelly? I had been nothing but a daughter to them, and now I was nothing. I went back to Harry's house, his parents offering me shelter without hesitation. The days that followed blurred together as Harry's family took me to the gynecologist and we made the necessary arrangements. It wasn't an easy decision, not by a long shot. But in the face of everything, it felt like the only option. We had to move forward for the sake of our future. The procedure came and went, and the recovery period stretched on. Harry was by my side the whole time, never leaving, always there. His kindness, his unwavering support, gave me the strength I needed to push through the darkest moments. The one thing I knew for certain was that Harry's parents, who had become like my parents, had supported me in every way they could. And James and Lorraine? They never once reached out. The day I moved into college, I thought about them. I texted James, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he would have forgiven me. His reply came quickly, and it shattered my heart. He called me a failure, a disappointment, and worse, he labeled me a prostitute. His words were cruel, devastating. The pain felt like a crushing weight on my chest, and I cried for hours. It was as if they had erased me completely from their lives. College was tough, but I pushed through. I worked part-time, kept my grades up, and did everything I could to succeed. It was hard, but I was determined. And through it all, Harry stood by me. His visits, his encouragement, they kept me going when I thought I couldn't take another step. And as the years passed, his family became more and more a part of my life. They cheered me on at my graduation, celebrated with me as I landed a great job in my field, and watched as I built my future. Harry and I grew stronger together. After years of being together, we took the leap and got married. Our wedding day was a beautiful reflection of everything we had been through. It was our love, our commitment, celebrated by those closest to us. James and Lorraine weren't invited. They weren't even a thought in my mind. Since then, Harry and I have built a life together. Recently, we bought a second house, our dream home, close to Harry's aging parents. They've become my parents too, and I want to care for them as they did for me. It's been nearly 20 years since James and Lorraine threw me out, and I barely remember them anymore. For a while, I cried for them, I mourned the loss of them. But by my second year of college, I knew I had to let go. I couldn't keep hurting over their rejection. And so, I stopped thinking about them. Through all of it, Harry has been my rock. We don't have children of our own, but we have 2 dogs who bring us joy. We visit Harry's parents often, take trips, and enjoy each other's company. Life, in its own way, has turned out beautifully. And now, when I look back at that frightened, uncertain 17-year-old, I wish I could hug her and tell her that everything would be okay. Then, out of nowhere, I received a friend request on Facebook. The name on the request was Matt, and the surname was all too familiar. When I opened his profile, my breath caught in my throat. He looked so much like James. It was like staring into a mirror of the past. My heart raced as I accepted the request, and soon, a message popped up, "Hello." My hands trembled as I typed my reply. What happened next shook me to my core. Matt asked if I knew anyone named James and Lorraine. The connection was clear, I was sure now. He was their son. I felt a nervous excitement stir in my chest. I hadn't thought about them in years, yet here he was, reaching out. The first moments of our conversation were undeniably awkward. I didn't know how to approach it, what to say. But then Matt broke the silence with excitement. He told me how, ever since he was young, he had known that his parents had another child before him. It was something he had seen in the family photos, and yet, every time he asked about it, they would avoid the question, offer no explanation. He had always wondered about me, about who I was. Over time, his search for answers had become a quiet obsession. Somehow, he had tracked down my name, pieced together the fragments from our hometown, and by sheer chance, he stumbled across my profile. Matt told me that he never had any intention of contacting me, other than simply wanting the truth. His words left me torn. I had spent years burying the pain of my past, and now, it felt like the truth was about to come crashing through the door. But I knew I couldn't hide anymore. I owed him this honesty. With a heavy heart, I began to speak, my voice trembling as I relived the agony. I told him everything. The years of silence, the cruelty of his parents, the pressure they had put on me to give up my child, their eventual betrayal when I refused. How, after that, they had cast me out of their lives completely. The pain of abandonment was raw, but I was determined to be real. I spoke of how, in their absence, it was my husband and his family who had stepped in, who had given me the strength to survive. It was an emotional floodgate, everything I had kept hidden for so long spilling out. As I spoke, I could hear the disbelief in Matt's voice, the shock in every pause. But he didn't interrupt. He listened, really listened. When I finished, a heavy silence hung between us, the kind that presses down on your chest, suffocating. Then, finally, he spoke. He told me that he had never imagined his parents could be capable of such cruelty. He had always believed their version of events, that I had left voluntarily, that I had chosen to disappear. He was so sure of it that it never occurred to him to question it. But now, hearing the truth, he said he was floored. He thanked me for telling him, for breaking the silence. His apology felt genuine, a wave of remorse that hit harder than I expected. He apologized, not just for his parents' actions, but for the pain they had caused me. The sincerity in his words left me shaken. After our conversation, a strange sense of relief washed over me. I was grateful that Matt had reached out, that he had sought the truth, and in doing so, had shown me a side of him that was nothing like his parents. But then, the worry started to creep in. What would James and Lorraine say when they found out I had told Matt everything? Would they try to silence me again? Would they be angry? I couldn't stop replaying the conversation in my head, questioning if I had done the right thing, if telling the truth would come back to haunt me. Should I have kept quiet, kept all the pain locked away? Or was speaking out the only choice I had? Less than a day later, I had my answer. Lorraine and James had found me, somehow tracked down my number. I hadn't changed it in years, so it wasn't hard for them to reach me. The messages started pouring in, multiple texts, phone calls, all angry, all accusing. They called me every name under the sun, their rage boiling over. But beneath the fury was the real issue. Why had I told Matt everything? Why had I betrayed their trust? James, in one message, wrote that I should have kept my mouth shut, just like I had for all these years. I was caught off guard, overwhelmed by the sudden flood of hostility. I didn't know how to respond, so I just avoided them, not knowing how to deal with this unexpected fallout. I had to tell my husband. He hadn't known about Matt's reaching out, and when I told him what had happened, his reaction was one of concern. He wasn't upset that I had told the truth, but he was worried about the unnecessary drama it would bring into our lives. He didn't trust James and thought that my revealing the truth would only make things worse. I explained everything to Matt, and he told me that, after our conversation, he had confronted his parents. They denied everything, of course. They called me a liar, said I was selfish, that I had used them and ran away when it suited me. But Matt wasn't convinced. He didn't believe them. He told them to stay away from his children and said he would be cutting ties with them completely. It wasn't just that, though. Matt shared that he and his wife had recently adopted twins, and James and Lorraine had refused to even acknowledge the new additions to their family. They hadn't even visited the children. It made Matt question everything about their behavior, but they brushed off his concerns. After learning the truth about my past, he finally understood why his parents had acted the way they did. He was shocked by their treatment of me, and he promised to make them back off. He even invited me to visit his twins whenever I could find the time. He assured me that no matter how his parents had treated me, he wanted to get to know me better, that we were family. Our conversation left me feeling better. Honestly, I was surprised by how different Matt was from his parents. His kindness, his sincerity, made me believe that there could be healing, that I wasn't alone in this. Maybe, just maybe, I would take him up on his offer and visit his family, see his children, with my husband. 7 months passed. I hadn't heard from James or Lorraine since that day I blocked them from all my communication channels. There had been no more threats, no more angry messages. I was sure Matt had stepped in, and I was grateful. Harry and I had visited Matt and his wife multiple times over the past months, and each visit had been a reminder of how welcoming and kind they were. We spent hours together, sharing stories, reminiscing, and bonding over our shared past. I had the chance to get to know Matt's twins, and they were everything I had hoped for, joyful, full of life. For the first time in so long, I felt like I had found something real, something that could help heal the wounds I had carried for years. Matt reaching out had changed everything for me, and I was truly grateful for the connection we had made.